Hey guys, welcome back to Carter Kustom. Last time you were here, we were finishing up the windshield on the X-Bird project. Now when I say X-Bird, the main part of it is extreme. Extreme engine, extreme body mods, but X also stands for experimental. And what I'm doing today is experimenting. I got this idea from watching people build surfboards out of foam and fiberglass, and I thought, that'd be a great medium to try to use on the inside of a car. So basically what I've done is I've made forms inside the car that will hold the foam that I'm about to spray on. Once I spray the foam, then I'm going to carve it into the shape that I want, and then when that's done, I'm going to cover it in fiberglass. And we'll just have to see what happens. So stick around, check it out. Well, in the first part of our experiment, you have to figure out what's going to hold the foam. So what I've decided to do is make cardboard forms, which will actually spray the foam over these forms. Now in order to get a nice curved shape, what I've done is I've taken a straight edge and I've marked half-inch increments all the way down this piece of cardboard. And then I've taken it over to my sheet metal brake and bent every half-inch. And what that does is allows you to have a nice rolling curved surface, good for starting our initial shape. From this point, what happens next, for it to hold its shape, we need a little side form. So what I've done is I've cut a piece of cardboard in the kind of basic shape that I want the dashboard to be. So you tape this puppy in here, and you see what that'll do is that'll help it hold its shape when it goes into the car. Now, since I've never done this before, my theory is that this form needs to be 3 inches smaller than what the dash is ultimately going to wind up being. Because what you want to do is you want to build up enough foam that you have room to carve your shape without hitting your cardboard. So I've made this template for the dash, and the next thing to do is to make a representation of what the transmission tunnel console is going to look like. And again, with the sheet metal brake, bending it so that you can make whatever shape you want. Once this is all done, you put it into the car, and this is what you'll be forming your foam onto. Now, in my mind, I thought, boy, it's going to be really hard to get this foam off of this cardboard. So what I did was, after I put the cardboard in, I lined the entire cardboard surface with wax paper, hoping that I'll be able to pull this foam away once it's cured and be able to work on it on a workbench somewhere instead of having to do all this work inside the car. Okay, now that the forms are in, the wax paper has been glued on there, which is a real pain in the butt because nothing likes to stick to wax paper. We're ready to start shooting foam. Now, I'm going to reiterate on this one. This is something I've never done before, so I'm not quite sure how this is going to turn out. My theory is that the foam will stick to the wax paper enough to hold the shape, but once it's hardened, I'll be able to remove it from the wax paper, take it out of the car, and carve on it. Let's hope that works. Welcome back to Carter Kustom. Last time you guys were here, I was spraying foam. Well, I couldn't get enough of it to do what I wanted to do, so I called up a local insulation contractor and had them come and spray the entire interior of the car with foam. As you can see, they didn't miss anything. You kind of can see a basic overview of how it's being carved. Trying to be consistent on each side, which is a difficult thing to do visually, so I have a few little tools that I use. Like if you use this piece of wire here and you push it in, till you hit the cardboard, you know how thick your foam is. You know that you still got 2 inches to go before you hit the cardboard. So I have plenty of room to round off all my edges and make this thing real pretty. So what happens next? I put on the heavy gear and I start grinding. Now that I've gone as far as I can with power tools, it's time to do the details. The details have to happen by hand. Reason being is this is a very soft material. Machines are too aggressive. You don't have a sense of feel of where you're at, but your hands and your eyes do. So, hand sanding, various grits of paper, just like you're doing a paint job. You start out with real gritty stuff, work your way down to the finer stuff. If you look at the dash and see how smooth it is, that has been brought down from 36 grit paper to 80 grit paper. Now, if you looked at the console, which has been cut with a machine, you can tell that it's a lot more rough. It's not as nicely shaped. By hand's the only way to go. So what I'm going to do is put on my little face shield so I don't breathe all this junk and get back to sanding. Well, I started out with 36 grit paper to get my shape. Now I'm using the 80 grit paper. Now, I know there's a whole lot of stuff here left to do, but once everything has been cut in 80, I'll be ready to start laying down some fiberglass. Now that I've finalized my shape with the 80 grit paper and I've got some really nice rolled edges, it's time to start the fiberglass work. Now the X in Xbird, as we were talking about another time, was experimental. That's the case with this. I've never laid this much fiberglass in a convex area before, and when you're using matte, you wind up with hairballs and bubbles and all kinds of stuff, so it's going to be an adventure. It all has to go on at one time. It's going to be a marathon. Hang around, see what happens. As you can see, I'm about halfway around the car in the fiberglassing process. That's where you lay down your resin, apply your matte, and then saturate the resin. I've done one layer up to this point so far and I'm getting ready to do the dash. When I started this, I started the undersurfaces of the dash, which I had a real hard time with. I tried to apply it in the conventional way, and what happened was the weight of the resin actually pulled the glass mat down. It wouldn't stay up. So I had to come up with a new way of doing it. What I did was I painted resin on the underside of the dash and let it get real tacky. Then I applied the fiberglass mat, got it as tight to that as I could get it, and then I let it cure. Then I came back and saturated it after it had already adhered to the bottom of the dash. So the next thing is we're going to work on the top part of the dashboard and get it glassed in. Well, finally, after weeks of back-breaking work, the last layers of fiberglass have been laid. As you can see, I've sanded it down fairly smooth, and the moment of truth has come up, which is popping these doors open and see if they come open and see what's behind them. This has all been a nice experiment, but I've been holding my breath for quite some time waiting to see what's going to happen. So let's cut to the chase and find out. You have to remember, we've gone from cardboard, wax paper, to carving foam, to laying fiberglass, several layers, and now the final test is cutting these doors open and seeing what we got. Cross your fingers. Ooh, it's moving. Sweet. Wow, it's gonna work. All right. There's our wax paper encrusted cardboard. Our panel separated just like I hoped it would. Moment of truth. And there it is, your door panel. Pretty cool, huh? Well, now that the doors are cut out, the next part of this experiment is to see if the rest of the panels will come out the way that I hope that they will, which is keeping the dash and the entire center console piece coming out in one big chunk, and then these coming out separately. This is, again, the X in Xbird, and we're going to see what happens. If you look over here, this is a factory trim piece that I've mocked up so that I kind of know how my fiberglass is going to lay up against the metal, and when it's done, I'll continue this around, and it'll be a nice tuck for the upholstery to go through, and a nice tight seam right there, and it minimalizes the look of it being chopped up. So let's see what happens. Boom. There's our behind the seat cover. That's one down. That went well. Come over here. This one I fooled with last night, so it'll be easy. Again, very nice. Got cardboard covered in wax paper, foam. You know something's going to release. Either the foam's going to release from the wax paper, or the wax paper is going to release from the cardboard, or the cardboard's going to come out all in one piece. This gave me 3 different options of it not screwing up and allowing me to get these pieces out of here. Let's hope that works on the console and the dash. Now up in the corners of the dash, since the windshield frame runs at an out angle, you can't pull this out without sectioning a small piece out of it, which I've already done. Which that will go back into the car with a bracket attached to it, so that when this all comes back in, you'll be able to upholster that piece to match the dashboard. All right, the next thing we're doing is getting rid of this foam behind here. Reason being is this whole thing, in theory, needs to slide back in order to clear everything to come out of the car. Next is the dash coming out. Gently just trying to remove the foam that's stuck to the wax paper, which is stuck to masking paper. Those aren't pretty noises either, are they? Ah. There's just something in the middle. Man, nobody told me this was going to be work when I signed up for this job. Come on, sweetheart, who loves you? Yes! There she blows. Gee, that was easy. I'm out of here. The reason I went through all of this hell to begin with was in the beginning when I started building the interior of this car, I wanted to be able to remove the transmission tunnel, winded, in order to work on the transmission without having to pull the motor. That's why all of this happened. And I'm tickled to death that it came out and it's going to work. Now that everything's been cut from the car and we have all the panels out where we can get a hold of them, first thing that has to happen is these need to become a three-dimensional piece, meaning that there have to be a wall that comes out off of this that makes contact with the contour of the door so that when you look at the door, you're not looking at foam and you have a nice clean surface to wrap your upholstery around. So the first thing I've done is I've ground all the foam away, then I've taken acetone and cleaned the fiberglass. Next, I'll make a form, which is probably similar to pouring cement. You make a form in order for it to hold the liquid until it becomes a solid. So I'm going to go ahead and make these forms first, and then we're going to do some glass work. Okay, in order to get the thickness that I want to have, I've put these blocks up under here. It holds the panel up off the table. Then we take our cardboard. Cool thing about cardboard is you can use it in a lot of really cool ways. It's great for mocking up shapes. It's easy to cut. And as you can tell, it doesn't have to be perfect. But it does have to be on the right side. All right, that's one. Another nice thing about cardboard is you can make nice, smooth, rounded, transitionary shapes. the next thing that has to happen is if you take fiberglass right now and you put fiberglass on this, it's going to soak into this and you're never going to get the cardboard off. So I've found that if you use wax paper, you'll be able to pretty much pull the cardboard away from it after the fiberglass is hardened. So that's what I'm going to do next. Okay, now I've found the best way to keep the wax paper onto the cardboard is contact cement, which works really well. And also, you'll still be able to get the cardboard away from the wax paper, which will also come away from the fiberglass. Say that 3 times real fast. Now, if you notice, I haven't cut where I've drawn my lines yet. There's a reason for that. I want to have that wax paper just out to the edge of the cardboard. Now, if I cut that and then lay my wax paper over the top of it, I'm not going to get a true edge. So I glue the wax paper. I mark it first. You can see through the wax paper. Then glue the wax paper down and then make my cuts. That way you got your wax paper where you want it and not where you don't want it. Should have saw me at the grocery store. I bought 10 containers of that stuff, and that woman looked at me like I was insane. What I was hoping wouldn't happen, did, but it's still not a big deal. Even the wrinkles, with this, you don't even need to care about the wrinkles. You just want to make sure that your wax paper is glued really well to your cardboard. Then once you've done that, now I can see my line perfectly through the wax paper. Bada bing. Now you want that, like I said, tight up against that, or your shape isn't going to be defined and it may stick out and you may have to cut it off because it doesn't fit where you want it to. Another reason why you kind of want to have this kind of tied up against there is fiberglass resin will run out between any cracks that it can find, which just makes for a little more cleanup at the end. I mean, it won't kill the job, but it just makes it a little easier to clean up if it's not running all over everything. And voila. Now, there's your form. Now you can coat this in fiberglass resin, lay cloth in here, and when it cures, it will be an end wall. So that's what we're going to do next.
If you notice, I'm not brushing the resin onto the fiberglass. I am actually patting it into the fiberglass. If you run a brush across this, since it's such a loose weave, it will actually tear and come apart. So the best way to apply it is with a brush is to dab it. Plus that, when you're dabbing it, you're also pushing out a lot of the air bubbles that are trapped in it as well. And the reason that we're not using actual woven cloth and we're using the mat is because the mat will stretch and shrink to a contour like what I just did right here. And if I had used a woven cloth, that wouldn't have laid down right there. See, like right there, that's air. You want to work that air out of there. I have actually made the mold, the form, larger than it needs to be, so that I got room to cut down. Now, if you want it to be strong, then you need to add more than just one layer, because one layer is really not that strong. The more layers you add to it, the stronger it'll become. And then if it's too heavy or whatever in the end, you can always come in from the back side and grind away some of the material. In this particular case, it's better to have too much material on here than not enough. That's the nice thing about fiberglass. You can add it, and just as easily you can take it away. It's messy and itchy, but for multi-contoured shapes like this, this is the best material to work with. As you're going around, and air bubbles are going to pop up, so you got to be paying attention and get the air bubbles out of it before it cures all the way. Now this is something that just about anybody with a little bit of skill and a lot of imagination can do, and there's a lot you can do with this material. They make Corvettes out of this stuff. They make all kinds of things from fiberglass. The difference between what I'm doing and what a company does is I'm just doing it a little more, I don't know how you say it, backyard barbaric. But what matters is the end result. So now if you'll notice from the beginning, when I was doing the dashboard to now, I've actually come up with a system that works for me, a way of applying this stuff that I'm comfortable with and allows me to move a little quicker through it. So if you've never done it before, the first thing you'd want to do is think of like the most simple shape you can think of and make your first piece and expect it to be messed up. Look at it as a learning tool. Once you've laid your mat in your glass, depending on how much hardener you've used, it'll cure in a matter of anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour, depending on your ambient temperature and how much hardener you've put in it. Follow the directions on the can as far as the hardener goes, and you can't go wrong. And you also need to mix it really, really well. It takes a long time for that catalyst to get into the resin evenly.
Now you can see why we did what we did. We now have an end wall that will rest against the door itself and fill that gap. So now you have a completed panel that is boxed in all the way around. All I have to do next is fine-tune the trim and a little body filler to make it match the door, and you've got one really cool handmade fiberglass door panel. Now that the end walls have been made, which connect the door panel actually to the door to butt up to the door, the next thing I had to figure out was how was I going to attach these? Well, I gave it some thought. I actually took and looked at some late model cars and saw how their door panels and upholstery were attached. So I came up with the idea of using pedestals and your standard Christmas tree type clips, which are these. So what I did is I fabbed up some aluminum pedestals, cut them out for the clips. Those pop into holes that have been drilled into the door, and they hold the panel on. Now that's just the way that they would do it on a late model car. What I have done though is when you're making something from scratch, you don't want to use the real hardcore clips until you're sure that you got everything right. So these clips here are basically holding the panel on, but it makes it easy to remove the panel without damaging anything. And once I know that everything fits the way I want it, then I'll put the hardcore clips on there that'll be harder to get off, and the panel will stay on there really well. Now, just like the door panels, all the other pieces also had to be capped off, and a way to mount them had to be figured out. So, of course, the end wall being capped. The one thing I was worried about was this being fiberglass and it being mounted to the metal in not a whole lot of places, it might be weak. So what I did was I created this beam in fiberglass across the entire dash. That adds support, and it also gave me places like this hole here to mount it into the car. What I've done is I've welded a pin to the car. This dash fits into the pin, drops down in the hole, and it's mounted. So there's basically one screw and 3 pins holding this entire dashboard in. Simple is not easy, but simple is always the best way to go. Okay, of course, in any interior, you got to think about mounting. This is the main support pin. There'll also be another pin here and another pin here that'll support the outside of the dash. And then if you come over here to the inside, the same thing had to happen. So what I took was the original surround piece that this was actually bolted in originally and covered in upholstery. I thought it was fiberglass till I pulled the upholstery off, and I was very happy to find out it was metal, because I would have had to make this whole thing out of a piece of tubing, which would have been a big pain in the butt, saved me some time. So I tacked that into place. Then if you look on the ends, there's a big gap where there was nothing, because originally the top mounted on a bracket right here. So I took a piece of tubing and I bent it around following the same contour as this piece and filled it in with sheet metal. Did the same thing on top of the doors. Now the panels have something to butt up against. Also mounting. Again, keeping things simple. One tab in the back and those pins in the front hold this entire dash and console in. These tabs, these 3 tabs, hold in the rear surround panel. The panel tucks behind the console, touches these tabs. They keep it straight. This one has a hole in it for 1 screw, so you got 1 screw holding a panel that big in. Works perfect. Simple, clean, and you don't have a bunch of screws showing. So now, let's put the dash in. Bada bing. Okay, now that the door is shut, what I've done is I've actually made these panels almost touch each other. If everything's touching, you know that you're straight. Then you come back and remove material from either side of this to compensate for the thickness of the upholstery, whatever it's going to be, leather, vinyl, whatever. And then when the door is shut and it's upholstered, you'll have a nice, uniform, tight gap. Once everything's aligned, Then I can cut them back to allow for the thickness of the upholstery on the dash and the upholstery on the door panels. And then voila, one handmade interior. Well, finally, after several hundred hours of work, we won't determine exactly how many hours that is, we've gone from foam to fiberglass to Dynaglass, which is this green stuff. This is a mixture of fiberglass resin and chopped up fiberglass itself. That helped me to get the flowing shape. Once that was done, you still have little pinholes and imperfections. So what you do next is you add a thin layer of body filler. Now the reason you don't use body filler right out of the gate is because it's not as strong as the Dynaglass material is. So once you've got the Dynaglass, you got your shape, the body filler actually allows you to fill in all the little imperfections and sand it down to where it all looks seamless. When that's finished, I am now at the stage where I'm ready to put primer on this filler, which will complete the basics of the fiberglass work that's been done in the interior. Once that's been done, the blocking process still has to happen. Now, blocking entails taking the final imperfections out of these panels by using a primer filler, which actually adds a little bit of depth to it, and it'll fill in whatever little tiny pinholes are left and any imperfections. Once that is done, we will be able to lay upholstery directly to this. No padding, right to it. All these lines will be nice and crisp. It's going to look beautiful. It's been a long time coming. Let's shoot some primer. Now that the panels are in primer, the next thing I need to do is pop them in the car, give them a little test fit, see what needs to happen next. We'll do that now. That's it.